Welcome to the Progressing Lives Everywhere podcast, brought to you by the Amoria Bond Group. In each episode, we feature prominent business leaders and industry experts sharing their personal experiences and inspiring anecdotes of what progression means to them and insights into their specialist fields, as well as tools, techniques, and practical steps we can all take to progress lives everywhere.
Welcome to the Progressing Lives Everywhere podcast, brought to you by the Amoria Bond Group. In this episode, your host, Andy Beard, is joined by independent business transformation specialist Otto Guth. Otto has worked across numerous industries, including manufacturing, supply chain, and business services, where he has led impactful, result-driven transformation projects to help underperforming businesses return to profitability. Today, we'll hear about Otto's own progression journey and discuss how businesses can embrace transformation in a positive way to ensure they are evolving and thriving in a world that is constantly evolving. Enjoy.
Otto, a warm welcome to the Progressing Lives Everywhere podcast. It's great to have you with us today.
Fine, thank you. I was looking forward to this interview, Andrew, to be honest.
Absolutely, so was I. So first things first, we need to talk about your progression. So Could you talk us through that, your progression story? So could you talk us through, the way I like to ask that question is, could you talk us through the progression movie of your life and career so far?
Oh my God, I hope you have sufficient time to cover it all, Andrew, to be honest. In the last 10, 15 years, I've been involved in major transformations within listed companies in an international environment, starting very small in a number of people involved, the turnaround costs and the impact, and developing over time into more being responsible for more projects. More project means more impactful projects, to be honest. In this respect, of course, it has been quite an interesting journey, reporting first to the companies themselves, and then private equity came around because the investment was quite substantial, and then all of a sudden you got your stakeholder management, which can be very complex in different cultural settings, so to speak. And sometimes you have three different parties as stakeholder: the selling company, the private equity financing it, and the buyer. And coming back to your question, as a matter of fact, it has been quite an interesting journey because it was a steep learning curve, so to speak, because the world is changing very, very rapidly. What has been small companies with a bright future 10 years ago, they do not exist anymore. New companies started up and developed themselves and are market and world leaders nowadays. When I was involved in the business transformation part first, it has to do with divestitures or acquisitions in merging companies or companies who are sold and need to be continued on an independent basis and have to set up their own organization structure. But as with everything, first time right is always very difficult to define when you are in a fast-moving world as we are living in today, with unsecured environment. And with that, I mean, for example, COVID. It simply happens, but it has a big impact on our day-to-day work. And the most important part that I've seen so far, and it was the most difficult one for me to manage and to get an influence on, is always related to people. People, their culture, people, the languages, the differences that is, the willingness to accept change, which is very important when you are in a transformation process, and also the support of senior executive leadership or the shareholder to finance and to support the change that you envisioned, and also dealing with the setbacks, of course, that normally comes with the process.
Really interesting. There's lots that we could talk about from what you just mentioned there. One thing that stood out to me, clearly the world is moving at a faster and faster pace. The pace of technology is changing, moving faster and faster and faster. So presumably the need to transform as a business is moving faster and faster and faster, or businesses like you mentioned earlier on, there were some businesses that were small, successful, and now not around anymore. So has the business transformation climate moved as in line with the world's transformation climate?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's fully linked to these aspects that you're just referring to. Just as a more or less as a reminder, but to put it back in perspective, is we have the economy that is changing rapidly. The way we act as a consumer is changing rapidly from visiting a store to online, for example. And of course, COVID has boosted this new way of shopping and this new way of the economy, the online one. The way we work, for example, virtual working or working remote, if you like, is completely new to us, but it developed rather rapidly and also require a different mindset from the employer as from the employee. Customer loyalty has evaporated where you want to go to a shop you feel comfortable with. It now depends on pricing and or the delivery times, for example, and the quality of work delivered. It has nothing to do with liking someone or being somewhere where you feel comfortable. It's always the fast pace of everything that defines our business mindset. And all of this you have to take into consideration when you are responsible for a company, for example, or responsible for a large number of people, employees, that you fine-tune it to the needs of the customer and the market there and then to be successful. Otherwise, it's over in no time. And we've seen those examples. I've seen those examples very clearly, very near, very close by as well, where companies who are really making top quality products are overruled because the delivery time was taking too much, or the management and the leadership was not really in touch with reality. That means with the dynamics of the market and the dynamics of the customers. So that's a lot of transformation on different fields and on different focus areas that needs to be managed if you want to survive in today's world.
Clearly, there'll be examples of businesses that are keeping up with this pace of change and are thriving off the back of it. I'm interested about the people perspective because people are naturally resistant to change. We're hardwired to resist change, for example. So there's always a challenge within that, and from the people aspects of business transformation. How are you, with the pace of change that's going on in the world, in the business world, how are you seeing that actually impact the people day to day?
Yeah, well, anyway, you must know, I work as a consultant, so people do reach out to me if they're already facing some problems. So we have to deal with a situation when I come in or when I join the company. And indeed, it always relates back to people. It relates back firstly and most of all to leadership and the quality of leadership. Because if a company is suffering from whatever setback, it always has to do with decisions made previously by current leadership. And if leadership is not capable or not able, or perhaps both, in dealing with those changes that the market is requiring, then you will never come out of the problems that people are facing and make progress and develop yourself. That's the starting point. One of the first questions that I put forward, and it's really confronting for a lot of leaders, is the question: what did you add as value to the company in the last week? Be precise. Are you aware exactly what you're doing, or is it just the role of the shopkeeper and keeping up business as usual? I mean, business as usual is certainly not the way forward for the future. It has to be dynamic. You have to know what needs to be done, and it all boils down exactly to three items, and that is the sense of urgency, what needs to be done, and the prioritization that comes with it, for example. And then, of course, it has to do with decisiveness. How do I deal with the situation on hand and based on the priorities? And do I have the decision power, but also do I understand the impact of decisions that needs to be made? And how do I deal with it? And the last, but certainly not least, is the way we communicate. Communicate means how we involve and engage our leadership, our managers, our workforce to participate and contribute so that everyone understands why we are doing this. By simply sending a message that we are going to change without any further explanation will certainly not create the engagement you absolutely need to be successful in this. And those are the three elements I've always seen as focus areas when we start on a new assignment and in a transformation process.
Yeah, that in a rapidly changing world, that will remain a constant, though, won't it? I know you're a big fan of the how question,
Yeah.
and rightly so. It's not necessarily about all the data that you're getting or the information you're getting. It's what you do with it and how you do it, and then of course the why question, which really impacts the people that have got to be involved in executing the change. And I love that question. The leadership question. It's a great reflection question that any leader can ask themselves day in, day out, week in, week out. What did I do to impact the business this week? And if we link back to progressing lives, what did I do to progress the lives or progress the business this week? And what will I do next week? And how will I do it? So I think some great insights there. We'll obviously come to a bit more about business transformation later on. I'm interested to know from your point of view, and there might be people listening who might be thinking about doing this at the stage of the career they're in. What led you to decide to set up your own company and take your services to different organizations and have that real impact on what's maybe a shorter term basis, of course, than a career move might do?
Yeah. From my own perspective, when I sold my company, it was a turning point in life where you have the opportunity to decide, do we go left or do we go right, make the right decision. And normally when what you are good at, you get a lot of energy from it, and you can also invest a lot of energy into it. That's first of all, but it should be the most triggering part, let's put it like this, the most triggering part is that you do something that you feel comfortable with and that you feel that you can contribute to change in this particular case. And in my previous company, it was a logistic kind of operation, had nothing to do with people management or leadership development, but the lack of leadership development and people development at that particular time causes some serious problems, but also my interest. So I focused in my next step on the leadership development and on people development and see how that can contribute to the overall development of a company and being successful long term. That also requires a lot of flexibility of people. People as you correctly said, by the way, are not up to change. There's a lot of resistance, natural resistance to change. And all of a sudden, when it is mandatory for people that they have to change, then they need at least to understand why we're doing it and what the objectives are, and how we as leaders and the managers and themselves, the employees themselves, the workforce, can contribute to this. It should be clearly understood. And that's the reason why I was referring to the communication part I just mentioned. Because if people don't understand, you will not get the engagement. That's absolutely mandatory and necessary to be successful in this.
And on that point, as much as possible, this should be kept positive, presumably, because
absolutely, there's always a downside to every upside. Of course, change comes with resistance. It's natural. Innovation, there is no change without innovation. There is no change without any interruption. And being disruptive, I would not say by default, but be critical and always ask yourself the question, if I do this, what will be the impact on short term and long term, and how can I as an individual or as an employee or we as a company benefit from it?
Yeah, absolutely. As you were talking, I remember reading about the famous business transformation phrase, which is, I think, like the burning platform or something, which is the analogy which was taken from that terrible disaster on the oil platform, where people were faced with standing on the platform with a raging fire or jumping off into a burning sea. And the analogy, like the burning platform, is to get people to jump off the platform. But clearly, if you're trying to instigate positive emotional responses in people, that's presumably the last resort that you would want to go through to instigate positive change in an organization.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And it also clearly indicates what leaders needs to do. It's not only focusing on the next step forward, but also look at the alternatives that in the what if scenario appears, what do you do? And so be prepared instead of surprised, as we always say. So this is part of true leadership. It's also part of modern leadership. It's also part of being flexible as a leader. Just simply going by the book and following procedures will not be the guidance towards success, for example. It's helpful, of course, but it's not written or carved in stone that this is the way forward, because it may change overnight very rapidly. Look what happened to us when I referred to COVID. It had a big impact. I had to stay myself for 3 months in quarantine, which was okay for me to do. But on the other hand, it has a huge social impact. It has a huge impact on the way you think of it, because you're focusing only on your work, which to a certain extent is okay-ish, but also to another extent you need to unwind as well. And finding this balance is very difficult when you are in a change and transformation process.
Yeah, and for the benefit of our listeners, Otto, when COVID first hit, and obviously COVID is a very prominent topic that continues to dominate the business landscape, or obviously the social landscape as well. But Otto took the decision to lock himself down next to the site he was at to continue to see through the business transformation, where the wheels were in motion and positive changes were happening. And we discussed that in a previous podcast around business transformation. So my question around that would be, is that one of your proudest moments in terms of some of the impact that you had when you took that decision? And if not, which project would you say led to you having the biggest impact on progressing lives through business transformation?
Well, actually, the project that you are referring to, we briefly touched upon it in a previous podcast, was quite an impactful, quite significant losses over a period of 9 or 10 years. Turned out to be a profitable situation in a quarter time, of course, with some good luck and some economic support or support from the economy, but also by change of management we could achieve this. So that was quite impactful. And I think that was also quite an achievement. But also, it's not only the consultant that brings the added value, it is the teamwork also with the existing MT members, management team members. And at the time, you remember that I think we replaced 10 out of 11 people from the MT, from the management team, by more pragmatic people. And everyone has his expiry date. So also this team also has an expiry date as well, but they will bring the change. And I'll come back to what I said previously. The sense of urgency should be well understood and recognized by the leadership. That's where it starts in the beginning. And secondly, of course, it has to do also with the willingness to change and understand that change is mandatory, even if it comes close and impacts your own position. And that's, of course, very difficult for people to accept, let alone to work with it and find a solution for it.
Yeah, it's never easy. Looking at progression as a word, what does that word mean to you, progression?
Progression is another way of saying of making sure that you achieve constant growth, development, and adding value. Everything you should do should add value to the process that you're in. That can be significant, it can be minor, but it always needs to be a step forward instead of a step back. That's my translation of progression. And of course, it comes with many varieties, as you can imagine, depending on from which point of view you approach it. From a leadership point of view, it's different from an employee point of view, but it always boils down. Try to explain for yourself or find an answer to the question, where did I add value in what I've done the last, let's say, week or so?
And is that something that you ask yourself? Do you go through that process of a weekly reflection or a daily reflection and go, right, where have I added value, and almost reassessing the priorities or benchmarking against priorities. Do you take yourself through that process?
Yeah, I do this constantly, but that comes with the territory, to be honest, Andrew, because being an interim transformation manager, hired to make sure that the transformation will work and will be impactful, that's where we get paid for. So we should evaluate this constantly, and give some feedback on the progress made, of course. But this is a normal feedback process. It's a normal loop for me in my way of thinking. But it's totally different for those people that I'll find on the other side of the table who will ask for your support and are not accustomed to answer to this question constantly. It's their evaluation moment or evaluation or appraisal process. Once or twice per year, we have a meeting and discuss your personal performance, and that's it. For me, performance management, because it boils down to performance management, it always does, is a constant process of improvement and evaluation, and learn from the mistakes you made, of course. And I hope you do make mistakes, because then you can learn from it, and then you can actually make progress.
It's a great progression tool, really is. So it
is, and it also replaces what I call old school appraisal process, where we sit together for an hour or two and evaluate your performance for the last 6 months. It's ridiculous. It should be monitored constantly and be evaluated, and if need be, then adapted as well, or adjusted. I'm sorry, that's what I mean. Adjusted. Yeah,
that's great. So the process you go through then, if I hear that right, you set the priorities, act with urgency, and then you have this constant process of performance appraisal, performance management, whether it's on yourself or working with others, where you're constantly stress testing it. Is what I am doing, or how am I making an impact this week, in line with these priorities and in line with the wider organizational objectives?
Exactly, Andrew. That's the way it is.
Great. Okay. Well, it's a really useful progression tool, as I've said. We've obviously started to touch upon some elements of business transformation through this conversation. I think it's really useful if we dive into that now. Business transformation is clearly a huge subject, and there are examples of major business transformation situations that are businesses that ultimately fail to transform. So if you think of Blockbuster, they could have bought Netflix for a cut price of what it's worth now, didn't, and Blockbuster's no longer in business. Nokia, who were at the forefront of phone technology and then just kind of dismissed the iPhone as a gimmick. For the benefit of our listeners, how would you define business transformation, and what are some of the most common business transformations that occur day to day?
Well, that's a pretty tough question, Andrew. And I think business transformation comes in various shapes and forms. The examples that you refer to has to do with evaluating your own business performances and how your businesses will develop in time or over time. That's always difficult to judge upfront. But at least you should be aware. I always find the example of Kodak, for example, with the photography world, a good one to refer to. Leading in the world, world leader at the time, and now all of a sudden it's all digitalized, and the company does not have the market share anymore. How could you keep up and be aware of it in time, so that you can adjust your strategy and your vision and your focus, and make sure that you are participating in a positive way in the new markets that are developing? That's always a very difficult one. The only thing that I can add to this one is just be aware what's going on in the market and be flexible in your organization and in your mindset to adapt to new technologies, to adapt to new markets, to new way of work, to new dynamics. Those are the basic ingredients, I would say, to see changes upcoming and that you need to anticipate upon.
So anticipate change as best you can. Obviously, we don't have crystal balls, but if you can anticipate change, it also sounds like there's a real priority needs to be placed upon, okay, you've got day to day, there are people that take care of day to day, but someone or some people need to have an eye on trends in the future for where take the Kodak example, the digital camera is on the horizon, and you don't necessarily have to close your normal operation down and then start doing digital cameras, but at the very least start to explore these opportunities and what impact that might have on your business in the
And
future.
actually, that boils down to one important thing. I think it is normally when we talk business transformation, we are in many cases one or two steps too late already, because there is a negative result. Markets are declining, or market shares are declining, or whatever, and then all of a sudden the alarm bell starts ringing, and then someone has to come along and help them to recover. That's the normal picture that we will see, or the regular picture that we will see. It would be great for companies to have at least one member of their board or one member of their directors focusing primarily on future development within their market, but also look at different markets, because there can be overlaps, or there can be additional opportunities that you're not aware of at that particular time because you're not focusing on it. So it should always be good to have let's say, a transformation or a business development, that's perhaps a better word, a business development manager or director within your company, being the person that connects with the real world, and not the world you're focusing on and the narrow horizon many companies do have, because they want to increase their profit, their shareholding, stakeholder value. Important, of course, but it's only a small part of the whole puzzle.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of your advice would be, don't just get caught up in this quarter's numbers. Have some people really having their fingers on the pulse for anticipating market developments, market changes.
It will pay off at the end of the day, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You touched on this a little bit again, and I wanted to dive into this as well, because clearly we'll have a spectrum of listeners today. I really like Jim Collins' book around this subject, How the Mighty Fall, and he has a 5-stage process that businesses go through, basically from initial decline to catastrophe. The first 3 are: stage 1 is overconfidence from success, stage 2 is undisciplined pursuit of more, and stage 3 is you're in denial, or you're basically denying that you're at risk. And then there's further steps, obviously step 4 and 5. From the work that you've done, and you mentioned it a minute ago, by the time a company kind of realizes the need for transformation, it's often now too late. They're obviously going to be in one of those 1 to 5 stages.
Yeah.
What, for you, apart from not keeping an eye on the future, what are some of the other key warning signs that a business, or even a department, clearly, it might be a particular function within a business, might end up needing to go into transformation? So for our listeners in different functions in business, what are some of the warning signs that a business is progressing in the wrong direction?
Don't think in silos, as a lot of people and companies do. Many companies, especially when you're a larger company, are led by procedures and by processes, which is fine in principle, but they should not be leading. They are supporting the process. That's a significant difference. Being pragmatic as well. Don't take things automatically for granted because it has been like this for the last couple of years. The market dynamics and dynamics of your customers require you to be flexible, and also want to be flexible, and also want to be overlapping fields. You see in many cases, especially the people are protecting their territory because it's their cup of tea, because they feel familiar with it. It's within their comfort zone. There is no comfort zone anymore. There is no guaranteed path to success. It's all flexibility and adaptability based on new technology also developing, that needs to be taken into consideration as well. You should be open to this. And this is the pitfall of many managers, that they are too focused on the business as usual and the way they did the business the last 10 years. It's, before you know it, it's old school and you're out of business.
So what I just heard there was a lot around flexibility, adaptability, being agile, almost going against, again, human nature, as we talked a little bit earlier on. It was in collaboration, so don't be in a silo, collaborate. And then it was the business as usual. So to get out of business as usual, what should a leader do, a CEO or department leader? Should they almost invest and block some time out to start thinking through, okay, how can we be flexible? How can we adapt? So almost rather than just get caught up day to day, turning up to work and doing the same things over again, actually planning some strategic time to look at how to continue to evolve and adapt.
And that's exactly what management teams should do, or board of directors should do, or shareholders should do on a regular basis. Just take a step back of day-to-day work and day-to-day problems and see how the market, the economy is developing, but more from a holistic point of view, not only from a point of view from your company, but what's happening. And find, connect with other companies as well. Everyone is struggling with the same, but we are still in our comfort zone. And this is a competitor. We don't speak with competitors, but together you can be stronger than each individual company or each individual as a manager. So look for the intervision and be open to another approach. It can be, in many cases, 80% of it will be rubbish at the end of the day, but at least you have another mind created, another mindset, and the remaining 20% can bring so much added value to your company eventually, but you need to be open to it and step away from convention, step away from comfort zone, step away from we've done this so many years, so that's a guaranteed path to success. It isn't. But it will require a lot of flexibility and adaptability of the leadership. And I think that's the how you call it, the red tape through every story and every assignment that I've seen so far. A lot of my time is spent on bringing along in the same path and in the same mindset of the leadership, and accept that change is mandatory and will stay there for forever.
Two points on that. I love the point about competition. There's a great example of that from the Ford business transformation that Alan Mulally performed. And when there's a great book on that. The book is called American Icon, and it's by the journalist from the Detroit newspaper. And he's written a book about the story of the transformation. And when Mulally came from the aerospace industry, so he was immediately viewed as with a lot of suspicion coming into an automotive organization. And one of the first things he did was contact the local rivals, so GM, Chrysler, and say, look, let's have a chat. And he didn't see them as competitors, he saw them as rivals. And these companies were obviously naturally very suspicious. Yeah. And the other thing he did when they needed bailouts during the financial crash, he testified and campaigned for them to actually get bailouts. And people were saying, well, why would you do that? They're your competition. You surely want to see them fail. And he said, well, no, they're our rivals. We if they fail, the whole industry is going to sink with it. So we need them to be in a healthy state. We need this rival. We need to be learning from each other and ultimately helping each other go forward, rather than seeing each other as competitors to try and destroy each other, basically. So it's a great point. The other observation I would just want to ask you about there is, you talked about the leadership group. How often do you see it that when you come in to have to do a transformation, that there is a real breakdown in that leadership group? So they're not necessarily collaborating, or they're not holding tension with each other to make the right decisions. Is that a real common trait of a business that is in these stages we talked about earlier on? Almost, it's gone past the point now.
Yeah, I understand your question, and it's a very valid point. In almost every assignment, I come across resistance to change within the leadership team. And that also explains why they are more or less desperately looking for a change, because they're not able to generate or initiate it themselves. It has nothing to do with poor performance. It has to do with your mindset. You should be open to reflect your own performance and the dynamics of your customers and your market. That will make you successful eventually, and then you have to adapt. You have to adapt. If you're not able to do this for whatever reason, it might be very simplistic, related to then I will lose my job, so I will not cooperate or will not go that way. That's very straightforward. It can also be more complex because there are there are dependencies with other companies or other departments that needs to be taken into consideration. So the impact would be too great or too powerful to consider. But if you don't, then eventually the day-to-day practice will take care of it. and they will make the decision for you. It's better to take your destination in your own hands and move forward on your own initiative on your own decided path forward. And that's a steep learning curve for a lot of leadership members.
Yeah. So you've almost got to, as a leader, transcend beyond your role, not just think about your role, look at your link in that group. And like you've already mentioned, don't just get caught up in your day-to-day, because at some point it will, if you do, it's going to pay you back, if you like. What would be your overriding message then to a leadership group about how they can perform? Clearly this will be something you might do in a 4-day offsite, but 1 or 2 messages to a leadership group in an organization about how they can effectively collaborate together to ensure that their business continues to evolve and expand and doesn't fall into the trap of having to go through a transformation.
I think you need to make a step back first before you can answer that question. Is just know what's going on in the market, in your specific market, and don't focus only on your product, but also the umveld, as they say, the related markets to your own market. Make sure that you fully understand what the dynamics are. That's where it starts with. And then don't take things for granted. Nothing is granted you can take for granted anymore, unfortunately. So that must make you very alert and your company very agile. So because you have to adapt to a new situation in a fast-paced environment. Most important thing is to get out of your comfort zone. That's simply that's against your nature. That's against your natural behavior. There are only a few great leaders who were able to put their own interests aside to focus on the things that really matters. And I think that's one of the most important messages that I can send out and like to share with the community. Try to get out of your comfort zone and don't be hesitant to do so, because in the end you will benefit from it when you're open to the change and the transformation that it will bring.
Great. But it doesn't always feel great to be out of a comfort zone, speaking from personal experience, but you know in the end the benefit, you will feel the benefit. So it's a really powerful point. Thank you. A couple more questions for you on this subject before we let you go. First of all, I wanted to just talk about how a business situation where obviously there are the big consultancies that do this type of work. Not every business is clearly going to be able to bring one of those in. So what would your advice be to an organization that is seeing the need to go through a transformation that necessarily can't employ a big consultancy? What advice would you give to them?
There are different ways of dealing with this. Normally, when people make a decision, we do not want the big consultancy firms supporting it. It has to do with complexity. It has to do with costs. And it has to do with time. Now they do. I know from experience they do a good job. Actually, they absolutely do a thorough analysis. You understand also based on previous experiences, because they got a huge archive and references to go on that can help you in analyzing the businesses that you are focusing upon. On the other hand, being a big or a large consultancy firm also comes with processes and procedures, as I just said. And the smaller companies, or even the individuals like the independent consultants who are specializing on business transformations for this type of company, do have a more pragmatic approach. They also have a better connection with leadership, because they are there 24/7 more or less. And the interaction is more focused on finding a solution there and then for the immediate needs, and then build it from there instead of building a model and implementing it. That, I think, would be the biggest or the greatest differences in the way of work. But it strongly depends on the size of the transformation that needs to be done, on the size of the company, the timelines and the deadlines that needs to be met. Sometimes really the companies it's 5 minutes to 12, something needs to change tomorrow, that's a different setup than we are revising our strategy and vision to be implemented for the next 5 years. So that's a different scope.
Yeah, absolutely. So just want to look forward now. If you could get your crystal ball out for a moment, what do you see to be the future for business transformation?
Yeah, I think from a business point of view, business transformation will be a hot topic for the next 3-4 years. I think, because we are in a changing world as we speak, and a lot of companies do not understand fully what the impact of the changing world will be on their organization. And I think the way we are, if we are recovering from this COVID period, which impacted a lot of industries quite heavily, it will for sure generate a new business or new business models for different industries. Look at the travel industry, for example, the airlines, for example, services related industries, online industries. Everything will change, and people will have difficulties in managing this themselves, so they will look for external expertise. So that will be a focus point driven by need to survive, for example. Making a step back and looking from a more holistic point of view, it's always good, I said it before, just to be constantly be involved in and engaged in change, how things will go in the near future. Have contacts and make have an intervention session with your competitors, because everyone is struggling with the same problem. And for sure come out of the comfort zone and be open for a different approach, even if this is unconventional and disruptive. And because of people do have a fear for disruptiveness, people do have a fear for a comfort zone or coming out of it or getting out of it. Sorry, that's always a problem that needs to be managed. And this is something that is always directly back to the leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a real theme. Sorry, there's been a real theme there from today about the key role leadership plays in the business transformation landscape. And you just mentioned there a minute ago, it sounds to me like you're advocating these industries that have been radically transformed overnight really should be collaborating together to come together to take themselves through the transformation that they're going to have to go through in order to ultimately make sure their industry is in the best shape possible for the collective whole, rather than just these individual businesses.
Exactly, Andrew. Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's been a really interesting journey that you've taken us on today through business transformation, and some really, really key and practical points have come out of it. My final question would be, in summary, how can we progress lives through transforming our businesses?
Okay. I think creating awareness and accepting that business will change constantly on senior and management level. I think it's mandatory to be successful in the future and not being surprised or by circumstances that are difficult to manage and to change when they finally occur. That would be my response to your question in a summary way.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for taking part in the podcast. If our listeners are interested in reaching out to you via social media, website, etc., is there somewhere they can go to learn more about the work you do in your business?
Yes, of course. I have a website. It's First Time Right. That's the name of the website. And you can also find me on LinkedIn with some references of the assignments that I've been involved with.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much indeed again, and all the best for the future transformations that you're involved in. And based on these insights, I know those companies will be in the right hands. So we look forward to speaking to you again.
Okay, Andrew, thank you for the opportunity to connect, and wish you well as well. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot.